Hi all, so we're going to turn now our attention to question 5. So this is the writing part of the exam, and you will get a choice between either describing or creating your own narrative or creating your own story. So question 5 asks you, so your teacher wants you to contribute to a collection of creative writing. The most striking ones will be selected. That's not the most important part of this question, but it kind of gives you some sort of a context. It kind of gives you some sort of a, what you're kind of doing. You're writing for an audience, which is quite important to understand. Write a description. So either you could write a description of a snow scene as suggested by this picture. So you can either describe this this image, okay, which is quite colorful and interesting, or you can write a story in which an animal saves a life. Okay, so you've got those two options. Now, in terms of writing a description, now it's easy to write a story, but maybe more tricky to make it as interesting and intriguing as you may want it. And a description might sound maybe less appealing, okay, but when you write a description, what do we mean by that? You are looking at this image, you're going to describe and kind of colorfully bring to life this description, or sorry, this image that's in front of you. And what this question really makes you do is actually use lots of descriptive techniques, okay? Because you're going to rarely, if ever, kind of tell the plot of what's going on, or you're going to more focus on describing. Okay, so that's the advantage of a question like that, to write a description, because you can really focus. It really makes you focus on the descriptive side to this question which you need to do. And then the other part of it is write a story in which an animal saves a life. Okay, now again, this is quite, you could write a story, any kind of story in which an animal saves a life. You could really replicate a story in which White Fang. So you can have a similar story to that. You can have a different story altogether. That it's really up to you where you want to take this. Whatever genre. It could be something that's quite dramatic. It could be something verging on fantasy. It really is. Generally, it just has to have an animal that saves a life. Okay. Now it says you get 24 marks for content and organization, which is all about your ideas, the way you kind of structure things, the way you kind of use paragraphs, and the way you can describe how interesting you can make the story. And you get 16 marks for technical accuracy. That's back, so spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So that's all about making sure that you're writing accurately, you're spelling well, you're using the best words that you can. Sorry, you're able to demonstrate that you know how to use a variety of punctuation, sentences, short sentences. So these are all really important. Now, you don't have to shoehorn everything in, but it's important to demonstrate how skillful you are at using all of these things. Okay, so it's important to bear in mind your basically how interesting your story is, and your ideas, and the other part of it is your kind of spag and technical accuracy. Okay, and it's worth 40 marks. You should really spend about 40 to 45 minutes on this, but remember to also plan. And here we have an interesting kind of structure for you to really kind of use, and which has been introduced to you towards the the end of the term or of school calendar year before lockdown. So this is drop, zoom, shift, and end. Okay, so if you think about this, if I take you through this, you need to drop your reader into the action. How, again, it's beginning. How are you going to open your story? Are you going to start with a dramatic, some dramatic action? Are you going to describe the setting? Are you going to kind of introduce a character? So what are you going to do to drop your reader into the action? Secondly, zoom into something in that image or in that story, and really closely describe it. So here you're kind of picking out something and really developing a description and giving a detailed description. Then shift, so shift the focus into something new in the story. So that could be a narrative shift, it could be a shift in terms of subject matter, but it could also be perspective, it could also be time, it could be a number of things in where you shift. Okay, and then where you end, think about how you're going to end. You're not being asked to write a whole novel, you're not being asked to write even a whole like a really long chapter or anything. It's more, as long as you've got 2 or 3 pages long of a piece of work, that's enough. It could be a part of a story or a description, but remember, ending is also very important. How are you going to end? How are you going to make sure that you end really powerfully? Are you going to finish with a cliffhanger? Are you going to finish with something dramatic that happens? Are you going to resolve a situation that arises in the story? What is it you're going to do that is going to make the ending quite memorable? Okay, so if we think about this description here, you really need to think about a number of things. So what I would do is I would look at a number of things in this image that I would find interesting to describe. So if I think about it, what stands out to me is the snow. You might describe the coldness of the snow, the brilliant whiteness of the snow. You might, again, yet another thing that stands out is the are the wolves, okay, or the dogs, and you might describe the way they look like, the way they kind of their movement. Another thing that you could describe is the beautiful kind of sky, the brilliantly blue and white sky. You could describe a number of things here, which you would find interesting. Okay, and you need to kind of develop those ideas. You could even think about like what's not in this image, like even the sounds, for example. You can make up what you can kind of hear, what you can, and speaking about that, it's important to also think about using sensory language. So how can you make sure that when you are writing, you are making the reader feel as if they're there? Okay, and that's by using things like onomatopoeias or imagery or vivid kind of language. So when we come to the story, write a story in which an animal saves life. Again, what's important to do is follow that structure, but make sure that whatever plot that you have, there is that you are writing an interesting story, but with lots of description. Okay, so now I've got a couple of examples I want to share with you. So the first one, which you probably have seen already, but I'm going to read that out to you, and hopefully you can see. The thing is, with drop, zoom, shift, and end, again, it's not a rigid thing that you have to do. As long as there are elements of drop, zoom, shift, and end in your piece of writing, that's what's quite important, because these are things that the examiners are looking out for. So buildings crumble like vast piles of sand blown together by desert winds. Okay, so really powerful description using lots of kind of imagery and kind of sensory kind of language. There was a silence so thick that it felt like you were swimming through it rather than walking. Dead and blackened clumps of grass were only signs of life. They clawed you and left greasy marks on the hems of your trousers. Here you've almost got the sense of zooming into something. The smell was, you got the shift to the smell. The smell was the really disturbing part, a mingling of burnt flesh, rotting vegetation, smoking rain. Light barely penetrated the clouds of mottled grey. And it goes on until the end, where it says, why do I carry on? I move forward, forward, ever forward. Again, ending the description in a really powerful way. Okay, so you've got a number of you've got a really good example there of a description. Now the other here's a narrative, okay, and you can of course read this, but I'll read that out for you here. So, results day. The school sports hall was a clamour of dread and excitement that gave an indescribable tangibility to the air. Cutting through this fog of teenage expectation and dread, he advanced towards the table where the box of brown envelopes stood. The most jarring part of this whole experience was how comfortable he had felt in this place, somewhere away from the dread confines of the classroom, where his main experiences had been abject failure and humiliation. This had been a place where he had expressed his talent and joy, where he had felt able to present himself through fluidity and coordination of movement, aimed toward an easily defined and achievable goal, the antithesis of how he felt during English Lit Paper 2. He remembered the sitting of the exam, he remembered the blank pages with 10 minutes to go, he remembered the coursing sensation of wanting to vomit, run out of the hall and keep running. He remembered looking over at the sea of diligent and focused students scribbling to the last. He remembered not wanting to admit that he had failed, was simultaneously wanting to shout it at strangers in the street. He remembered the walk home after. He remembered the screaming voice in his head that blacked out all other messages. Failure. He remembered the hope and expectation in his mother's eyes. Okay, so here you've got a number of kind of drop, zoom, shift, and end examples here. But it's really up to you. Now have a go at doing this. And remember to try and make your writing as interesting as possible, and make sure that you are kind of thinking about demonstrating your ability to write for, an audience, the examiner here. Good luck.